Hi, welcome to Culturally Determined. I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade, and my guest today is Rabbi Ari Hart. Rabbi Ari, could you please introduce yourself?
Hey, everybody. Great to be with fellow Ari, fellow lion. Ari means lion in Hebrew. I'm a rabbi based here in Skokie, Illinois. Grew up mostly in the Chicago area. Have smicha, ordination from a rabbinical school called Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, which is a modern, progressive, open, whatever modifier you like, Orthodox yeshiva in the Bronx. And it's where I was trained to be a rabbi. And my rabbinate is about engaging the world and engaging in issues of moral concern and engaging in the big questions of faith and theology and practice today, and doing so from an Orthodox context, from the traditional, rooted sources and practices, and bringing those two together and seeing what comes out of it, which is why I was excited to join this podcast today. It seems like you do a lot of interesting conversations and work around, things that are happening in the world, hot issues, hot topics, what's really going on and what people are thinking about. And I'm excited to try to bring the Torah, our tradition, to bear on those conversations. And that's what I do. So excited to be here today.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. Yes, as you noted, this may be the first podcast in history that has two Aryehs. Are you an Ari or an Aryeh technically?
I'm actually an Ariel.
Okay.
And that's Lion of God. So it's pretty cool. Also, though, talk about cultural determination.
Cultural determined is the title.
Determined. So I'm Ariel. My sister's named Miranda. So if you can name the Shakespeare play, pop quiz.
Yes, that'd be the Tempest. I was an English major, so
very good.
So that's very funny.
So there's a little bit of both. We got the Jewish culture, the Shakespeare culture.
I have to ask, since you are a male Ariel and you are roughly my age, what was it like when The Little Mermaid came out in 1991 or whatever? How was that for you? Because I got some of it, but probably you got a lot of it also.
It was traumatic. It was terrible. And I went to a Jewish day school. So you'd think at a Jewish day school, you'd be kind of protected from bullying about your name, about your Jewish name. But no, The Little Mermaid came out, and I hated my name. And people would be, "Oh, you're the Little Mermaid, Ariel." And they would always, I'd get the bar mitzvah invitations addressed to Miss Ariel Hart. And I was misgendered by name, and it drove me nuts. And then later on, I came to realize it's actually a pretty awesome name, but I definitely hated it as a kid, in a large part due to The Little Mermaid.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we share that. Yeah, it was. I caught some of it, but being into there's girl Ariels as well, but being a male Ariel in the early 90s, a specific strange type of experience. But anyway, that's not what we're discussing today. So okay, with the topic, the sort of large topic is Millennial Jews. And this is a topic I've actually been thinking about doing an episode for years and have never really got together to do it, or I was looking for a guest, couldn't find someone. And then I happened to see you quoted in the New York Times a couple weeks ago in an article about American Jews and Zionism and the recent conflict in Gaza and Israel and the West Bank and other places in the region. And of course, whenever I see someone named Ari in the news, I'm always a little bit curious. And you are, about the same age I am, and you're a rabbi. So I was just looking on your, find out just a little bit more about you, and thought, maybe this is finally the person I can talk to, a young rabbi. And so we're not. I hope to not mainly talk about. Definitely not mainly going to be talking about Israel and Zionism, but that sort of inevitably comes in, at least in 2021, when talking about American Jews. But sort of like the reason I've been thinking about this is, for a long time, is there's been this sort of conversation about millennials and religiosity, and the general narrative is millennials are less religious than previous generations, less likely to go to a place of worship, or maybe they don't identify as religious in any way, or maybe they're spiritual but not religious. But a lot of stuff I've seen written about or talk about this focuses on Christians and Catholics, and there's various reasons given for the decline in religiosity among those groups, but I haven't seen that much written about American millennial Jews. And since I am an American millennial Jew, I, am implicated in this as well, and I'm definitely part of it. And just thinking about how I was raised within the faith, and also thinking I've often thought about the people I went to Hebrew school with. So I went to public school, but a Hebrew after school 3 times a week in a conservative congregation in northern New Jersey. And I was thinking a couple of years ago, I wonder how many people in my class of 40 or 50 kids belong to a synagogue right now. And if I had to guess, I would say 5, maybe 10 at most. And I would count as one of those people who doesn't belong to a synagogue. And why is that? Is that part of this larger thing? Are there specific reasons? So there's a lot of possible places we could go with this. But how do you, as a rabbi, how does American millennial Judaism, if we could say that such a thing exists, how does it seem to you in 2021?
Yeah, so it's a big question, and I'm not a sociologist, and I can speak from my experience and what I see, but I don't have my finger on the data, and there are people who do that kind of work. But from where I sit, I think. So I'm a rabbi of a community, and it's a modern Orthodox community, although our members, I think their personal practice, there's a range. It's a very inclusive Orthodox community. We have people who, are strictly Shomer Shabbat. They don't, strictly Orthodox, don't drive to synagogue on the Saturday, eat kosher, et cetera. And we have people who don't, who by observance level would, fall somewhere outside of the Orthodox spectrum. But what we have, which is, I think, what is so valuable and what people are looking for, is we have a strong sense of community. There's a really strong sense of community, and it's a particular kind of a community. We are located in the suburbs. Skokie is a suburb of Chicago, and it's mostly families, young families, people with young children. But it's a thick community of people who center a large part of their lives around the faith. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean in Judaism, it doesn't mean that they study Jewish dogma every day, or they even study the Torah every day, or even every week. But it means that the rhythms of their lives, their community, their friends, is focused around Jewish community. That is something which is, I think, so desperately sought by all Americans today. I think there are these broader forces of atomization and individualization, and it goes, the bowling alone and all that stuff. People are just more isolated and not part of groups that have thick social fabric. We're part of online communities. And those can be very meaningful and powerful, but they are not communities that shape the rhythm of your daily life. And when I think about Jews and faith, for me, a large part comes back to community. And I feel very blessed and fortunate to have it for myself, and to be a leader in a community that is thick and strong in those ways. And I think about what we have here. There's, in my synagogue, there's 300 families. The vast majority of those families live within 1.5 miles of one another. That's something that I think America, just young people in America, are missing. That sense of, you have a local community with people that you interact with regularly, that know about your life, that care for you when you're down, that you care for them when they're down, that celebrate you when you're up. They're there at the wedding, they're there at the funeral. Just that sense of, I'm a part of something, I belong to it, I give to it, I take from it. That's, for me, that's a big part of what Judaism is really all about. And it's a big thing that I think that I wish I could export it to all America, and really the whole world right now. I think the world is going through this revolution of the fracture of all the communities which used to hold people together and hold people, and they're going away. And I think it's a great tragedy. And I honestly, a lot of the problems that we see in the world right now, I think you can trace back in some form to that. I'm not saying that religion is the answer, right? I'm not even saying that. Like, honestly, if there could be a model of like what we do, and it would be completely atheistic. I mean, look, I believe in God. I think Jews should follow the Torah, like all that stuff. I believe in that. But like, I think the value of community and thick community and real community, I wish that everyone, whether they believe in God or not, had access to that. That's, I think, the best thing that Judaism one of the best things that Judaism can offer. And then there's the wisdom and the practice and the spirituality, all that stuff. But for me, that's like a big focus of what I do. Mm-hmm. And I see it working very well for a lot of people, who live around me. But I also know there's a lot of people who don't have that, who are not connected to a synagogue or not connected to, people in the faith community. And that makes me sad. And I wonder about the future of Judaism in America without that communal infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Do you see yourself more as a community leader, a spiritual leader, or are those fused together in some way? The way you're describing it, it sounds like community leader more than spiritual leader, which I guess is maybe somewhat surprising, but maybe not when we think about what's happening. But how do you understand that?
Because it's community that is anchored in spiritual values. Right. It's a community that's anchored in religious values. Those are some of the parameters of the community, right? We celebrate the Sabbath, right? And even if people do it in different ways, there's kind of an agreed upon general way that happens. Like you go to synagogue and you see people and, you have meals together, right? Like, an average, we call it Shabbat. The average Shabbat here in Skokie in normal non-COVID times is, you go to prayer services, your kids see their friends, they go to children's groups services, you do some praying, you hear a sermon, there's some spiritual, hopefully uplift and inspiration in those moments. Then you socialize at what we call the Kiddush, and you see a lot, you're in a room with 200 people and you're just connecting about, how's your kids? And you're just having those regular kind of social glue moments. And then you go to someone's home for a lunch. And then in the community, and you eat lunch together, and then you go to the park, and you see another 100 people in the community and their families all running around the park. You take a walk with somebody, and it's this very thick communal day. And I'm, the rabbi of that. So there is an aspect of spiritual teaching and structure and framing and practice that I preach, but also a lot of what I do. And I know, and again, I think they're hand in hand is try to build community and connect community and connect people to one another. Judaism is not ultimately a solo faith, right? It's not like, Christianity where my understanding of Christianity, it's really, there's a big focus on being personally saved, right? Are you saved? Are you not saved? You accept Jesus? You're not accept Jesus? And it's about my soul and my relationship to God. That's there in Judaism also. Of course, there's a soul and there's a relationship with God, but it's a religion that really plays out in the communal sphere, not just in the individual sphere.
Right. And the minyan is is one symbol that,
right.
And you can explain what a minyan is for people who don't know better than I could, I'm sure. But you need a number of people in order to have a prayer, say certain kinds of prayers.
Yeah, a quorum.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And right, there are many things in Judaism where you need a group. You can't do it alone, right? There's a whole mourning when you lose a parent or when you lose someone close to you and you're going through a mourning process. There are things that you cannot do unless you're with a group of people, which is, again, it's forcing people into the community. And look, community is not always simple. Community can be really complicated. And some communities are not healthy. Some communities are toxic. Some communities, lift up the wrong kinds of people or protect people that shouldn't be protected. So I'm not saying community is a panacea or it's always fun and everything's perfect. It can be very challenging. A lot like family, like family is great and family can be challenging and can be very destructive too, depending on the dynamics. But at the end of the day, it is a central aspect. Even throughout COVID, for me, we were able to keep our minyan going, right? And we did it, thank God, safely and masks and distance and windows open in the middle of February and
Wow.
no instances of transmission. But I had every day since July, every day I went to a room and there were at least 10 other people in there, and we prayed together and we said hello to one another. And just the fact that I was able to do that was such a blessing, and that other people wanted to do that and realized that it was important. There's this value, like, oh yes, like we have this thing and we have to keep, gathering together safely. But we were going to keep doing it. That gave me tremendous comfort and meaning throughout the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned, of course, that you are a rabbi in Skokie, Illinois, and I guess Skokie has a totemic symbolism in 20th century American history. And I was just reminded of this yesterday. There's an article in the New York Times about the ACLU and whether they are as interested in pursuing like strict free speech protection as they once were. And the paradigmatic case of this is the Nazis, American Nazi Party marching in Skokie. Yeah. And so my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that a number of Holocaust survivors settled in Skokie after World War II, and that's why the American Nazi Party wanted to march there in the late 60s or early 70s, and it became a famous free speech case about them getting a permit. And then I believe, and the ACLU represented the Nazis, and I think the ACLU lawyer was himself a Jew, who is, I believe, is quoted in this New York Times article. Will include the link. And so Skokie. So I don't know much more about Skokie aside from that. So, but I would assume that the people who belong to your congregation are grandchildren or great grandchildren or children, or maybe these people. Maybe sadly not as many around anymore as there used to be. But Skokie is a unique Jewish community in America. So I've talked way too much about something I don't know that much about, but could you correct me?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. It had one of the highest population of Holocaust survivors in any city outside of Israel was Skokie in the 60s and 70s. Many survivors settled here. The Jewish community was built here in many parts, in many ways by survivors. Do you know why was that? Was that sort of just happenstance, or were there specific reasons that groups of Holocaust survivors came to Skokie in particular? I should know that. I don't know for sure. I mean, Skokie was a suburb that was built in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So it was a new place. There was affordable housing was being built. Skokie's like the American dream suburb. It still is. Very high. There's 70 languages spoken at the local high school. It's a lot of first generation immigrants from literally all over the world. It's really amazing. Who lives in Skokie is incredibly diverse. And it was that way, I think, for Jews fleeing the Holocaust and who were forced out of their homes in Europe. Skokie was both those Jews and also Jews from the west side of Chicago, south and west side of Chicago, which in the 50s and 60s that was part of the Great Migration, and African Americans from the South were moving up in those neighborhoods, and Jews and white people left those neighborhoods, and many of those people came to Skokie. Chicago, an incredibly segregated city, and Jews were not allowed to live in other suburbs because they were Jewish. So just classic race religion dynamics in the 60s. The Jews wanted to move away from the blacks, but the Jews weren't allowed to move into the places with the whites. So Skokie was kind of this middle ground, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I think it was just known that it was an affordable place where you could live the American dream. And still today, the housing is affordable, and you can buy a nice house, and there's good schools and garbage pickup twice a week. And I think it was attractive in those ways. But yeah, we lost one of our few remaining Holocaust survivors just 2 weeks ago, 99 years old, built, one of the builders of the synagogue, an amazing human being. So those memories of the Holocaust and of the Nazi marches, and of that certainly shaped Jewish identity here in Skokie for the survivors and their descendants, second, third, now even fourth generation, which we have in our community.
Mm-hmm. So it probably is. It's unique. I mean, there's not a lot of other places in the world that have this same history. And the place where I grew up, I guess somewhat the parallel is Jews who left Newark and Essex County, New Jersey. A lot of them settled in South Orange and Maplewood, New Jersey, and brought their synagogues with them as they moved. And that pattern repeated itself around the country after World War II. Okay, so getting back to millennial Jews, you talked a lot about community, and one of the sort of cliche about Judaism is it's more about doing things than believing things. I don't know how, maybe that's true. You can weigh in on your opinion of that. But there's observance and ritual plays a larger role in Judaism than in some other American religions. And so but at the same time, the history of Judaism and the sort of ethnic racial component means that people call themselves Jews, and they are Jews, but maybe they don't actually do any of the ritual observances, etc. And whereas someone who grew up, Methodist and then stopped attending church, maybe they wouldn't call themselves like a lapsed Methodist or something. Of course, there's lapsed Catholics, but it's a different thing. And I'm wondering how you see people from, under 40, although the oldest millennials are turning 40 this year. Do you see any differences in our generation than in previous generations when it comes to that observance?
Well, I think, you raised an important point about Jewish identity and that it's complex. Avram Infeld is a Jewish educator who tells this story how he goes all over the world and talks about Judaism, and he poses the following thought experiment to his audience. He says, soccer, baseball, football, red, yellow, green, Jews, blank, blank. Right? So in America, well, what would you answer?
I mean, Jews, Christians, Muslims is the first thing that comes to mind.
That's the Americans say: Jews, Christians, Muslims. In the former Soviet Union, it's Jews and Russians. In Israel, it's Jews and Arabs. In South America, there's like no other category. It's just it's like a separate, there is no blank blank. And I think that those answers speak to some of the different aspects of Jewish identity. There's the faith piece, Jews, Christians, Muslims, we are a religion. There's the ethnicity piece, Jews, Arabs. Even though the ethnicities of Jews in Israel, right, it's a wide ethnic range, or at least we would perceive it that way, but maybe Israelis would say, no, there's an ethnicity called Israeli, and there's different colors of Israelis, but that's like an ethnicity. And then the Russia piece is more culture. It's like Jewish culture and Russian culture, and they're so like at odds. So culture, ethnicity, faith are three of the ingredients that I think make up the Jewish people. And that's I like the language of people more than the Jewish religion or the Jewish ethnicity. Right? We're not a classic ethnicity, because there are so many different DNA strands in Jews. You go to the state of Israel, you see who's around, you'll see all different colors and sizes and shapes, and it's a beautiful thing. And also anyone can become a Jew, right? I can't become black, but someone can become a Jew. So it's not a classic ethnicity in the same way.
Right.
But it's not just an ethnicity because there is a faith. But it's not just a faith because you could be Jewish and have nothing to do with the faith. There is a culture piece. I eat, Chinese food on Christmas Day, and I watch the movies and I, use Yiddish slang, but I don't believe in God, right? So those are all aspects of what make up Jewish identity. As an Orthodox rabbi, I probably privilege the religious piece the most, and I think for me it's ultimately the most interesting and important and significant one. But I also totally recognize that if someone says I'm a Jew, they can say that and mean a lot of different things. You can have someone who So Jewish people. And I think for millennials, I wonder if that's understood. that there's a thing as a Jewish people, that it's not a Jewish faith, it's not a Jewish ethnicity, it's not a Jewish culture. It's a people that have all those things. And I wonder if that gets lost sometimes. And I also wonder if people feel like they can be a part of that people. If I say, well, I don't go to synagogue, so I'm not a part of that people, or I don't, or I don't look Jewish, I'm a Jew of color, and like all the Jews that I know are white, right? So I'm not really a part of that. And I think the answer that we need to say is yes. It's a people, and if you want to be a part of this people, you can. Just like Ruth, we just celebrated the holiday of Shavuot, and we read the book of Ruth, very important biblical book. And basically it's about a woman. She's Moabite. They were actually like an enemy of the Jewish people. And she's like, you know what? I'm in. Like she says to her mother-in-law who's Jewish, your people's my people. Your God's my God. Where you rest, I want to rest. Where you're buried, I want to be buried. And she's in. And boom, and it's done. So I think we need to, I don't know how millennials relate to that concept. And I think, part of that piece about community, I'd like to believe that for people who are feeling, like not a part of a community, not a part of a people, like kind of atomized and isolated, or a part of communities or identities that are not as thick and meaningful. I think, today people express their communities through products they buy, or through kind of much thinner, bigger but thinner ways. And I think the idea of being a part of a people that's like ancient and has a bright future, and I don't know, like, I'm obviously pretty in it, so I can speak for myself. I feel pretty in it and connected to it. And the millennials, it also feel, a lot of these things, I think the piece about Israel, the piece about even just belonging, tribalism, right? Like these are not so popular, these ideas right now. Like I have a tribe of people that I'm connected to. And sometimes for good reasons. Tribalism can be incredibly dangerous and violent and destructive. But at the same time, what does it mean if you don't have a tribe? What does it mean if it's just like you and your nuclear family and like a few friends, and that's it? And there's like 8 billion other people, and you're just sort of floating in that. Mm-hmm. I think there's got to be an in between, and yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and there's a lot there. The search for identity, that's not limited to millennials, but the way that technology and culture have changed make it so that like a lot of people, it seemed to me, a lot of people are searching for an identity that is both specific to them, that makes them unique, and the character to this would be like the snowflake kind of stuff, but also like brings them together. And the like sort of dumbest version of this is like the Twitter bio, where someone says like, Hufflepuff, Scorpio, ENFP or whatever, their Myers-Briggs thing. And so people that all that stuff, astrology, Harry Potter houses, like people are looking for some way to identify and belong to something, but also in the sort of, it seems to be in the online world where anonymity is very possible, but also you want to stand out, you want to like build a personal brand in some way, listing all these different things is both identifying yourself uniquely and then saying, I also belong to the tribe of Hufflepuff, even if that is something that J.K. Rowling, made up 20 years ago. And
right, but also it's like, but do you really belong to that? I mean, like you're marking, you've got a marker, and there are other people with that marker. But is Hufflepuff going to bring you chicken soup when you're sick? Right. And I think that's like, and are you going to go to, are you going to go to Hufflepuff's wedding? Right. Like that's the cycles of life, the rhythms of life. Do you have community there for you in those moments? That's, I think, the key. And I think a lot of this stuff is, I don't know how people are experiencing it. I left Twitter intentionally.
Well, a very wise move on your part. Yeah. I have not made that move yet. I'm within it, but yeah, I just think, you're right. So there's no actual real Hufflepuff community. I guess maybe it's possible to think of people forming some sort of loose association through online fandoms. It doesn't have to be Harry Potter, obviously, if they identify with, House Stark and Game of Thrones or all sorts of other
sports team
things.
or anything. Yeah.
Yeah. So
and I would say it's not real. I think there is a reality to it. There's some things that are probably really great about it. I mean, I think, right, like I'm a Bulls fan. It's cool to know that there's, a million other Bulls fans around me. That's a nice feeling. But my expectations of my fellow Bulls fans are different than they are of my physical lived community here. And I think people, there's just more that's possible. And look, the flip also, another piece though, is that with community, there are sacrifices, right? With community, it's not all about my identity, right? When in a communal setting, like there is a kind of a giving up of some of that autonomy or self-expression. Not that, and it depends on the community, right? Some communities, some religious communities, it's like really intense, right? Like you cannot wear those clothes, you cannot think those thoughts, like you gotta submit and conform. Some communities, it's very, very loose, right? There's you do whatever you want and we'll all be friends. But like those communities, it's harder. The thickness is harder to foster when you have everyone just doing something completely different. Mm-hmm. I think probably most communal leaders think they're hitting the sweet spot. I'd like to think I hit the sweet spot, but of course everyone thinks they're doing it. Like if you're more conformist to me, you're totalitarian and crazy. But if you're less conformist than my community, you're, there's nothing really there. It's too thin. But that's something I think about a lot is, what concessions do people have to make to be a part of this community? What do they gain from being a part of the community? I'll tell you, I was someone I've been talking with recently who's leaving the community. What does that mean, right? Like, what's the difference between a cult and a community, right? Like a lot of cults will say, we're a community and everyone he's here and they're so happy and we're all together. But like, if you try to leave, it's not going to be a good ending. So obviously we don't want to do that, right? So how do you create a community that that's permeable, people can come in and out, but also is strong and has a good foundation? These are some of the things I think about.
Mm-hmm. So one, as I look back on my, Jewish life, I mentioned before, like my Hebrew school was, is way up there, top 5 parts of my Jewish experience. And
in a positive way?
No. And so, and probably, I don't know, it was idiosyncratic in various ways, but I feel like the Hebrew school I went to, which was 2 synagogues in this town, 2 conservative synagogues pulled together, like 40 or so kids in each grade, and twice a week after school, and then a Shabbat, service with like a junior rabbi kind of thing. That's probably pretty standard. I think most of us really hated it, and there probably was a different way it could have been done. Definitely could have been done better. But looking back at it, that when you're a kid, the things that happen to you, don't entirely understand them, but the way they play out nonetheless continues to shape you. And the things that I remember about Hebrew school, well, first, really no kid after like a full day at school wants to go to 2 more hours of education. So that was sort of a bummer, but whatever. But also I think the things they tried to inculcate within us were sort of like, they wanted to prepare us for our bar and bat mitzvahs. And they wanted to tell us that Israel was really good. And that was about it. And we didn't really even like learn how to speak Hebrew. And then once I got to high school and started taking like actual Spanish classes, I realized like they never even taught us like how to conjugate verbs in Hebrew. And I think like they want us to read it and be able to, do the bar mitzvah. That was sort of the pinnacle of the Jewish education. And then a lot of people dropped off after that. Some people continued to a Hebrew high school thing. I did not, and probably the majority of my, fellow students did not. And and there's just things like things you look back at your schooling and you think about, well, they taught us this, but really it's like this. And why did they not tell us these things? And I just think, I don't know. I wonder how, I assume that you are also heavily involved in Jewish education in your congregation. How do you see that? Is there anything that's changed as millennials are sending their own children? I'm not sure what generation millennial children are, to Hebrew education. What what is emphasized, or what should be emphasized? How do you understand that?
Sorry, a giant dog just ran through my backyard. I think Hebrew school education for 90 or for a large percentage of American Jews over the last 70 years was a massive failure. And that's sad. It is sad. I think for a lot of people experienced it as a waste of time and focus on the wrong things. And it's a great loss. I do Jewish education, but the truth is most kids in my community go to private Jewish day schools. Mm-hmm. And that's a bit, and that's a huge choice and a sacrifice again, that you have to make to do that. But what comes with it is that sense comes back to that community. And you're that kind of 360 community, right? Like my kids are in school with the kids and they see them in synagogue and then that's their social group and et cetera, et cetera. So, Jewish day school education provides both the strong, textual, critical thinking, Jewish learning stuff. But it also provides the strong communal identity. Look, a lot of millennials, I think, probably are turned off from Judaism because like a crappy, childish, non-nuanced, not sophisticated Judaism was shoved down their throats 2 days after school each week where they would rather be doing other stuff. So I get that. I wouldn't be excited about Judaism if that was my experience. I think there's a wonderful book, which I'll recommend, by Sarah Hurwitz called, what's it called? I forget what it's called, but it's an introduction to Judaism. She was a former speechwriter for Michelle Obama. And it's her. She's the same.
I've heard of this. I've heard of this book. Yeah,
yeah.
Just
it's a wonderful book. Same story. She went to Hebrew school, hated it, was totally unaffiliated, and then found her way into an adult Jewish class at a JCC. And I mean, Jewish studies is amazing. What you got at a Hebrew school was probably really crappy. Rote memorization of stuff for bar mitzvah and whatever propaganda. But the Torah and the tradition of study and debate and questioning and non-dogma, right? Just like exploration and inquiry over thousands of years as one unbroken conversation is so cool. It's so cool. There's nowhere else you can find that. And all the questions that people struggle with today, faith in God, questions of power and ethics, questions of where do I belong, what's my identity, questions of just basic, interpersonal ethics, they're all part of the conversation. And it's, again, a conversation over 5,000 years from Iraq to Algeria to Poland to Chile to the United States. It's just amazing. And I hope that people can find their way into those conversations because they're so great. And I think Sarah's book is actually a great way into some of those conversations. Mm-hmm.
And we'll track down the title of that, and the link to it will be below on the site when people are watching this. Yeah, I remember reading reviews of that book, and I guess I should check it out. There's just things that, I mean, if you look back on a public school history education, what they're teaching kids about America in 3rd and 4th grade, and then you look at what you learn in college, there are going to be some differences. And actually, I took sort of randomly, I took a history class in college that was called something like Jews in Muslim Lands, and learned a lot more about history, actual history, and the Babylonian exile and things like this. They glossed over or never would have mentioned. The Cairo Geniza and all sorts of other interesting historical facts, and the role of Jewish viziers in Ottoman, principalities and all sorts of stuff like that. And this was not ever. I mean, maybe it would be hard to communicate these things to 10-year-olds, but
right.
But yeah, I do you see? A Jewish day school experience is different from a Hebrew school experience, and probably.
And I won't say that I was necessarily getting we weren't talking about viziers, and we weren't talking about theodicy, and we weren't talking about Jewish, meditation and mysticism. But the advantage that I got is that I got the fluency, right? I learned how to read Hebrew, and I got access to those texts. And I think, the experience, a millennial who doesn't have access to that, the Hebrew isn't there, just the discourse, the ability to step in and be in those conversations because they didn't get in Hebrew school or they didn't even go to Hebrew school. I think that can feel alienating, right? If I'm a millennial Jew and I've heard that the Talmud is really cool, and it is cool, it's super cool. But I walk into a Talmud class, I'm just like, what? What is going on, right? So
yeah, as a kid, I don't know if they taught us like the Torah, the Talmud. Like, I don't think these were like explained.
Right, it wasn't
as like
differentiated.
Separate
right.
things. Yeah, so there were things, and it's almost like as things are taught in different ways. As I got to college and interacted with other students who were also Jews, they had different experiences and talk about different things. I've learned different things, but yeah, it's just the version of American Judaism that was given to me through that schooling was a defective one. And yeah, it would be interesting to do a survey of my 30 or 40 former Hebrew school classmates and see what they are thinking about their faith and do they belong to a synagogue. So I feel like if a family is raising Jewish children, that would be an impetus to join a synagogue or rejoin a synagogue.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's probably a big part of it. So the conversation around Judaism, American Judaism, anti-Semitism has sadly, changed gears or something in the past couple of years as, sort of things that like anti-Semitic currents within the country that I at least thought had gone away or were like banished to the basement of American culture emerged in different ways online, the alt-right. And there were more. If you asked me in 2014 how important anti-Semitism, how much of a factor anti-Semitism was in America, I probably would have said, negligible compared to other countries. And the mass shooting at the synagogue in Pittsburgh and other things during the Trump years changed how I thought about that. And that was actually the first non-high holiday or bar mitzvah Shabbat that I services that I attended was the week after that shooting, when there was kind of like a movement to stand up against hate and stating it kind of broadly. So that was the first time I've been to just a regular Shabbat service in many years. So it sort of makes sense that if a group feels threatened, some parts of the identity, someone's identity are like activated, and it seems maybe more important than it did otherwise. And then we also have all the Israel stuff. But how did you see anything changing? Is this just anecdotal, or were people you were talking to feeling differently about millennials in particular, but not specifically? Doesn't have to be. Were they feeling differently about their faith after during the Trump administration and the people in Charlottesville chanting "Jews will not replace us" and other horrible events that have happened over the past 5 years?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. It's funny. Anti-Semitism definitely a rise, and anti-Semitism is weird. It doesn't fit any one particular worldview in how you or it can be made to fit worldviews. But I think that it's wrong when people comport it towards one or the other. I mean, with Trump and with Pittsburgh Tree of Life and Poway and all the alt-right people were doing stuff. My community is very split or diverse politically. I'll say it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example. Just last weekend, I had a conversation with two millennial congregants, each who expressed their recent feelings of being unsafe in synagogue, which they had never experienced before, but within the last couple of years. One was, in response to the rise of white supremacy, Pittsburgh, and her understanding of anti-Semitism is that it's a right-wing phenomenon, and that's what makes her feel unsafe. And the other one said, I never felt unsafe until the last couple of weeks when there was a rise in pro-Palestinian demonstrations that led to or just were anti-Semitic. Mm-hmm. We had some in Skokie. We had a synagogue vandalized. We had a group of people chanting Intifada at a synagogue, just across the street from the synagogue. Mm-hmm. So that's anti-Semitic. And he said, I never felt afraid. And I was like, well, there was shootings at synagogues like just a couple years ago by white supremacists. And he's like, oh yeah, that didn't make me as afraid. Mm-hmm. So it's like, what your kind of underlying narrative, both as Jews and beyond the Jewish community, is going to inform what you're afraid of. I'm afraid of both. I think both are scary, mm-hmm. and both are a threat. On the far left, on the far right, they're different. And I'm not going to get into the game of which is worse, but they both scare me. I think what's complicated about anti-Semitism outside the Jewish community is that everyone agrees anti-Semitism is bad, right? Most people, let's say like, oh yeah, that's bad, shouldn't be Jews. But where it comes from and how to respond to it is understood very differently by different people. Mm-hmm. I know we don't want to spend all of today talking about Israel, but I think right now in this latest iteration, a lot of the anti-Semitic, the reason a synagogue down the block from me, whose windows was smashed, was because of Israel. And I think something that really freaks me out is you see the rhetoric around Israel turned up to an extreme, right? To say Israel is equivalent to the Nazis, to say Israel's committing genocide, to say Israel is committing ethnic cleansing. I know there's those words are just in the common understanding of what genocide and ethnic cleansing and Nazis are. Those are lies, but they get spread and echoed a lot in certain spheres. And that leads to violence, because if I told you, hey, there's if it was 1944 and I was like, hey, there's a building in your block that's like a Nazi supporting building, and they love Nazis and want the Nazis to do all their Nazi things, you would feel, you wouldn't feel so bad if someone beat up one of those people or even hurt or killed one of those people or hurt the building, right? Damaged, attacked it, because Nazis are the worst evil thing. And when that kind of rhetoric gets used against Jews, the Jewish state is, and this rhetoric that is, I've seen it. It's, satanic. It's Nazi. It's, they killed their baby murderers, right? That kind of language, which also has roots in deep anti-Semitic stuff, right? Jews kill babies. We drink babies' blood, right? We're evil, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. I see that as very dangerous, and people are not willing to call it out, or say it, or even worse, I think are inciting it, even, celebrities, some political leaders. So that really freaks me out a lot. I think it's real dangerous. And I think we haven't seen the last of it, unfortunately. It's tied and cycled, this stuff flares up during conflicts, with Israel and Hamas, but it's not over. And the white supremacist stuff freaks me out too. Believe me, when there are two very, very real dangerous threats. And right, depending on sort of which side of the political aisle you're on, I see people downplaying one and upplaying the other one, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, that's very well stated. I think, the narrative about prejudice and bigotry in America, for very logical, understandable reasons, is understood as the white-black narrative, but that is a core part of American history. But applying that lens, anti-black racism is not the same. Is different than anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a more unusual phenomenon that, as you said, it can come in lots of different directions. I've joked like the great thing about anti-Semitism is like everyone can participate. Any any group or creed, color, whatever can have their own twist on anti-Semitism.
I think it's but people can find common grounds where people from all can find common ground.
Exactly, and Jew hatred has been used by various bad actors throughout history to rally other groups and distract from various other problems and blame the Jews. That's happened repeatedly throughout history. So I think that's one issue, is that anti-Semitism is the things that people talk about when it comes to racism in America. It's just a different problem when it comes to anti-Semitism. And, over the past year, we thought a lot about anti-black racism in America. And, that may have unintentionally have sort of shaped some conversation. I mean, I will not ask this question and we will not answer it. Are Jews white? Just putting that out there. Sort of an unanswerable question, and sometimes yes, sometimes no. But fitting Jews, how do Jews fit into the white American white racism conversation is also very complicated. And so there's simple answers to this, and demagoguery are bad for all involved in, and Jews in particular. And
if I can jump in for a second, I think the talk the last year or so in America, I think dealing in new ways and in good ways with our legacy of racism, very important ways. I support that, and there is a lot that needs to be done. And white Jews are part of that story. I mean, again, my family left the south side of Chicago, because blacks were moving in. That's why they left. So I think we need to sometimes Jews will use it as a pass to say, well, I'm not white, I'm Jewish. These aren't my problems, or I wasn't here during slavery. I wasn't a slave owner. And I think that's not right. We are a part of the story in Newark, right? We are a part of the story. But at the same time, one of the dangers, I think, of the last year has been the black and white, the narrative. There's an oppressor and oppressed. And you have to choose. Either you're on the side of the oppressor or you're on the side of the oppressed. Either you're a racist or an anti-racist, right? And there's no middle ground. Putting aside Kendi and the validity of those arguments, I think when it comes to more complicated issues like Jews and power in America, right, where there's a little bit of both, like Israel. Israel's a very powerful state. There's no doubt about it. Israel's more powerful than Hamas, no doubt about it. On the same time, that doesn't mean that Hamas is instantly right and Israel is instantly wrong. We've lost that nuance. We've lost that ability to see things, at least in progressive spaces, in shades, as opposed to just there's a good guy and a bad guy, and if you're not on the side of the good guy, you're the bad guy, and that's, I think, very dangerous. Yeah,
and just the online world encourages that sort of us against, me against you, or us against them, tribalism in the bad sense of our side is good, their side is bad, and so this is a problem we're going to be dealing with for a long time to come. And so getting into the Israel piece of this, and that's how I found, you came to my attention through this quote in the Times. It is, I mean, obviously, I'm not the first to say that this latest, violence between Israel and Palestine, the reaction to it in America seemed different than before. And, as you said, Well, I mean, the narrative of this is super complicated, and there's probably people who disagree with everything I'm saying. But for basic, I mean, every side sees itself as the victim and aggrieved, and has their litany of grievances, and probably most of those grievances have some accuracy to them. And I think, what am I trying to say? I saw something seemed to shift where, okay, people who are very pro-Israel have long used a charge of anti-Semitism against critics of Israel as a way to tell them to be quiet or to discredit them. And sometimes that charge is accurate, and sometimes that charge was not accurate. That sort of like rhetorical play seems to not be working as well anymore. But at the same time, now suddenly there are some critiques of Israel where the anti-Semitism is shining through, as I see it, and people don't want the old play of calling critics of Israel's treatment of its Arab neighbors, just anti-Semites, like that. It's sort of a boy who cried wolf situation. Like the charge is exhausted, but sometimes the wolf actually does come. And just seeing how people were treating this online, and I follow a lot of lefty liberal types mostly online. I saw people saying things that were surprisingly anti-Semitic to me, and I maybe just things that surprised me. And if this person who saw themselves as one person I'm thinking of in particular saw themselves as like a good leftist, if they had been confronted with this particular meme they post or whatever, probably would have been like, oh yeah, this is anti-Semitic to say. So the thing I'm thinking of in particular was, Andrew Yang gave a sort of standard milquetoast statement on the conflict, and a lot of people started attacking him for it. And he didn't mention Palestinian suffering in the statement at all. And then I saw someone post online something about the Zionist power, that Yang was a puppet of the Zionist power structure in New York City, and a lot of Zionist interests were really behind his candidacy. So that is, sort of maybe not anti-Semitism 101, but like 103. The hidden hand of the Jew is controlling politics, and it really did surprise me to see someone who would check all the boxes of being a good liberal and ally and progressive and so forth, post something like that. So, and that's obviously just one anecdote, but things do seem to have changed. And then it puts American Jews, many of whom still do or once would have called themselves liberal Zionists, in a strange position. And it's a giant mess. And I unfortunately don't. I think it's just going to get worse. It's something I'm not optimistic about. The forces in Israel and outside it seem like they're not heading in a good direction. So I've kind of been babbling a little bit here. It's a super complicated topic, and probably everyone is mad about it already. But do you have your reaction to that?
I agree with a lot of your analysis. I think the one thing I'll say is, a friend of mine said in 2016 he learned to stop predicting things, and in 2020 he learned to stop planning for things. And I'm getting out of the business of predict. I mean, I share my if I had to make a prediction, it would be like what we saw last couple of weeks and just more. But I don't know what's going to happen. I do think that the demonization of Israel is just often anti-Semitic. Look, there's a woman who posts. I am still active on Facebook, for better or worse, and there's a woman who is like a hardcore communist, just straight up. And whenever it was Israel, she writes, "Israel doesn't have any right to exist. The Israeli workers and the Arab workers need to rise up together and overthrow the oligarchy. And like, no station has a right to it. No state has a right to exist. It should, workers of the world unite." And so for her, it's like, okay, when you say Israel doesn't have a right to exist, I'm cool with that because you're consistent. You don't think any state should. You think nation states are evil and blah, blah, blah. But, it bugs me when like a white liberal person living in America, which was actually a colonialist enterprise and actually committed a genocide, and actually continues to, exert massive control across the globe and is responsible for the stuff, the death of hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians over the last 2 decades in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other places, are saying Israel is illegitimate. Israel doesn't have a right to exist, right? BDS, boycott Israel. Meanwhile, you're paying taxes to the U.S. government, which by your analysis actually did and continues to do all the horrible things that you accused Israel of. So I think there's a lot of hypocrisy there, and I think there's a lot of, and it's the singling out, right? I'm not saying Israel's perfect. The occupation of, the military occupation of Palestinian land is a tremendous moral problem. It is a tremendous, it's an untenable long-term moral situation. I mean, I think it was as a temporary thing on a path to 2 states. It's not good, but it could, it was a step towards that. But if the 2-state solution goes away and that's not on the table anymore, I have great fear for what that means for Israel as a democracy. You can't be a democracy and really control the lives of 5 million people who aren't citizens. So that's super real. And while within Israel, Arab Israelis have 100%, equal rights and access to government and education, all those things, there's still tremendous inequality, and that's a huge problem. It's not apartheid, but it is. There's racism on that. There's racism, just like there's racism in America. It's not a perfect state. It has deep flaws. It has deep problems. But the magnifying of those flaws to their Nazis, and the complete, ignoring of other countries which have similar, if not worse, flaws. I mean, there's a Uyghur genocide happening right now in China. There's a Rohingya genocide happening right now in Burma, Syria. These things. There are just really horrific things going on all over the world. And just like the laser focus and the beating up and the Zionists, and the Zionists are enemies and the Zionists are evil. And that's, to me, it's like, okay, this is anti-Semitism. This is anti-Semitism.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be the first to note that, Israel and just the whole, everything sort of gets the level of craziness. Like Israel makes people crazy. There's this is not exactly the same. There's this thing, Jerusalem syndrome, where people go to visit Jerusalem as a tourist, and suddenly they start to understand that they themselves are like a prophet, or they're the reincarnation of Jesus, and they start preaching, and then they're taken to a hospital and disabused of these notions. So it's the place where the 3 Abrahamic religions have deep historical ties. It's just it is complicated. I think. But it's okay. The situation is complicated, and talking about it is complicated. I think part of this, there's a disillusionment among sort of my cohort of people who were raised, like I said, at our Hebrew school, sort of like the second big thing after learning what we needed to become B'nai Mitzvot. We, just Israel's great. It's this great place, and if anything bad happens here in America, you'll be able to go to Israel, and you'll be safe there. And this was what was told to us as children. And even then, I remember having conversations with my Hebrew school friends being like, we don't speak Hebrew. Why would we go to Israel? We would go to Canada or England, maybe. These are 10-year-old New Jersey kids thinking about this stuff.
But look at it, but
Israel was held out as this great place. And so sort of the kind of history that, Americans are taught about George Washington chopping down a cherry tree and other such things, my cohort of American Jews sort of received a similar fairy tale version of that story about Israel. And then once you become adults and you realize Israel has done bad things as well. It's not, the one nation in history that is blameless in all things. I think it does lead to sort of a throwing up of hands or disengagement from the whole thing, or saying, or becoming an explicit anti-Zionist or something. And so, there's there's a huge controversy over the past couple of years about the 1619 Project in America and reexamining what are the real roots of this nation, and people, this New York Times Magazine project made seemingly tens of thousands of people really, really angry, and we're still arguing about it years later.
Right.
And that was 400 years ago. The state of Israel was formed in 1948, so there's still people alive who were, who were there when it happened, and the arguments about its founding will continue to go on in the same way they have here in other countries. But it's
as they should, as any mature state should. And myself at the day school also, we weren't taught complex Israel history. We were taught the 6 Day War was awesome, and it was awesome from one perspective, and for Palestinians it was not awesome, right? So people need to have a mature relationship with their Judaism. You were taught a childish Judaism and a childish relationship with the state of Israel. That's what people were given. And I think it would be tragic if that's where people stopped, right? There's more. Israel, as flawed and complex it is, I think, the most important thing the Jewish people have accomplished, and the greatest source of Jewish thought and renewal and culture and politics and music and spirituality in 2,000 years. It's a language that was dead was brought back to life. A lot of the things that they taught you in the Hebrew school, though cliche and incomplete, are also kind of true. It is kind of true. You could go to Israel. You could go tomorrow and say, I don't feel safe here. I want to go to a place where I feel safe. You wouldn't speak the language. It would be incredibly difficult, but you could do it. And that wasn't true for 2,000 years. That wasn't true 60 years ago or 80 years ago. And a lot of Jews died because that wasn't true. And anti-Semitism, as we've seen, the anti-Semitism that we thought went away, that was alive then, is alive now. And it's good. It's good that there's a Jewish army. It's good that there's a place where Jews can be safe, because a lot of people in the world hate Jews. And I don't think that's going to change. And I wish the same thing for Palestinians. I wish the Palestinians have a state, and there should be a Palestinian army at peace with Israel, that Palestinians can feel protected and safe. I wish that, as long as we live in a nation-state world, that every people should have the right to feel safe, and be in a place where they don't feel threatened, and their existence is not tenuous. But that's been our story, and that's one of the reasons why I support a state of Israel. It's not the only one. I also think we are deeply connected to that land for millennia. And there's been a constant Jewish presence in that land for thousands of years. And I think that's also really important. But, the people who reject, I wasn't told that Israel did this bad thing. So now I'm an anti-Zionist. I think that's also childish, right? A mature relationship is one that can hold the good and the bad. And that can, it's the same thing. If you have you find out that your grandfather, who you loved, also was a jerk to his, that's part of growing up, right? You realize that things are more complicated, and you're given something as a kid that's one-sided and rosy, and then you grow up and you realize there's more to the story. But that, and it's well, what do you do with that? Is it a rejection? Is it anger and huffing and puffing? Or is it okay, let's learn. I want to learn about this. I want to understand it better.
Yeah. This particular angle of the conversation, people have been analyzing for a long time. We can talk for a long time more. I do think one other aspect of it is the alienation that the Netanyahu successive governments have brought to American Jews in the close relationship. 75% of American Jews almost always vote for the Democratic presidential candidate. That seemed to be basically the same thing. And there's always this idea that the Jews have finally had it with the Democrats over some Israel thing or something. Seemingly didn't change. And so 3 out of 4 American Jews voted for Biden. And just, how the relationship between Netanyahu and Trump, and I think also was, something else that made the average American Jew who is a Democrat who cares more about things happening in America than Israel because they're American. I think just saying, to the hell with this, I think that is not uncommon response.
That's, and I think the relationship between Trump and Netanyahu was, at minimum, just an utter PR disaster for the state of Israel and America, and more, very damaging, very bad. Trump, was a horrible man who did hateful things, and the fact that he aligned himself so close to it was disgusting. I mean, for me as a Jew, it was so upsetting. And look, and I take some of my fellow Orthodox Jews to task over this. I mean, people's embrace of Trump was I get someone who's at the end of the day, they got to make a choice. I'm going to vote for this. I'm not going to say I don't understand people who voted for Trump. I know people that did, and I understand I disagree with them, but I understand why. But the embrace of Trump, the Trumpism within the Orthodox community, I don't understand or condone, and I condemn it. I have publicly, and people yell at me about it. But I think it was just a terrible thing.
Mm-hmm. And one of the a few days after the election, I was looking at the maps of the blue and red precincts in the New York City area, and you could tell the ultra-Orthodox enclaves very easily through those maps and in spots in Williamsburg and Monsey, New York, these enclaves, were the bright red spots, the only ones in the, more people were excited about Trump in, this enclave than in Staten Island or whatever. So that's a part of it as well. And also as, we wouldn't even get into the demographics issue. We've gone on for a while. There's one thing I was talking to a friend of mine about. I told her that that I was going to be doing this interview with a rabbi, and she mentioned something I should ask you about that I'd never even heard of before. So maybe but the thing she mentioned was Zoomer fetishization of Judaism, and Zoomer, so like Gen Z fetishization of Judaism, and I said, I don't know what that means. And so she sent me the link to. There's a lot of strange people online. We all know this. It was a particular person, a woman who was 22 years old, and said that she was a convert to Judaism, and she was both mixing things like she wore I'm forgetting the correct term. She was wearing a traditional head covering that an Orthodox woman would wear, but she also had an OnlyFans account, which is like this online way to like make your own pornography and make money off of it. And then she was tweeting about how she wasn't Zionist. And so my friend's interpretation of this was like, there are people who are converting to Judaism to be social media influencers in the anti-Zionist direction. That seems wild to me, but there's a lot of strange things that happen online. But it did make me think about something we were thinking about before with astrology and people being interested in, old sources of wisdom or meaning or something. And so someone who, converts to Judaism at age 22 in a sort of incoherent way, and then is very excited about it online, is sort of like someone who got really into tarot or something. And then this particular person was fighting with various other people online who were saying, you're not actually Jewish, like this is a fraud. And so who knows about this particular strange example, but do you see any encounters with this sort of thing, which hopefully is just a blip in the social media radar, but maybe is a phenomenon, maybe not.
Yeah, this is a time when people are having all these weird things on identity. Some of it necessary. I mean, thinking about gender and gender roles, and this is something I'm involved in. We're in my community. We advance. We advance the role of women within Orthodoxy, and it's a rethinking of what it means to be an Orthodox Jewish woman and a leader. So I think we're just in a time now where every question about identity is on the table, and people are doing all kinds of things. And I think the dust will kind of have to settle on a lot of these things, and what's healthy and legit, and what's just attention seeking or narcissistic or whatever it is. I don't know this particular case. Sounds confusing.
Yes.
I think it's, and again, it's like, it's one thing, from a Jewish lens, Judaism is ultimately not about you, right? It is ultimately about a community, a covenant, a relationship. And if we make Judaism all about the individual, I don't think it'll really last, and I don't think it's really Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
If people want to get into their Judaism, I think you should go to shul, or go to the JCC,
Rabbi.
or go read a book. I'm not saying, like you do something, or you bring someone a bowl of chicken soup, right? It's not about me and my identity, right? It's about being in this conversation. It's about giving. It's about love. It's about connection. It's about community, and you could be all kinds of ways in that space, right? You can be, queer or straight. You can be black or white. You can be all kinds of things. It doesn't actually really matter that much. I think at the end of the day, like it sort of matters more that you're a part of it. That's, I think, that would be my message to this person. I'd say like, okay, like come to shul and make it not about you. Just make it about, I'm in shul. I'm making the minyan, right? I'm counting myself as part of this 10. Like I'm delivering the chicken soup to the old lady who needs it. Like that's what I'm doing. If that's what it's about, ultimately, I think it all shakes out. But if it's all about me and my identity, I think that doesn't. I think at the end of the day, it's not what it is.
Okay, that's a good place to end, I think. And there are probably a dozen other topics we could have included on this conversation, but we only have so much time. But thank you for taking the time. It's been a good conversation and informative, and I hope Jewish and Gentile viewers and listeners alike
inside baseball
got something out of this.
Inside Jewish baseball.
And like I said, I really do. I'm going to Google around and see if there has ever been a podcast with two Aries before. Right. I think this is Jewish history. Jewish history still alive today. Okay, so you are not. You said you're left Twitter. You're still on Facebook. I mean, usually this is where I say, do you have anything to promote, or where can people find your stuff online? But how can people find out more about you or your congregation or what you're currently involved in?
You can find me on Facebook, just Ari Hart. My synagogue is called Skokie Valley with Jacob. You can follow us on Facebook if you want to, see our events listing. It might not be the most stimulating follow. I'm on Instagram. I do like Instagram. I don't post on it much, but I have an Instagram page, Rabbi Ari Hart. Welcome. Join the conversation. You know what? I'll say there's one. If you're interested, I did a video for Google. I did a Google talk about the Talmud, and that might be interesting to some of your listeners. It's about like what the Talmud is and why I think it's so cool. And if you want to find that link and pop it.
We'll track that link down, and it will be below this video. And yeah, that sounds interesting. Yeah, I think there's like I said, my Jewish upbringing, my formal Jewish education, things from the culture, all combined to make what I currently understand Judaism to be. But there are plenty of things that I never learned about, or I should educate myself on. And maybe
read Sarah's book. I would recommend that to you.
Okay, yeah, I'll check that one out. Okay, so thank you, Rabbi. Thank you to our viewers and listeners. You can rate, you can review, you can smash that like button, do all sorts of things. And I guess that's it. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ari. Take care.